All right, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us for this next episode in our Future Ready Accountant Fireside Chat series. So just a bit of housekeeping before we get going. So this session is going to be lasting for about 60 minutes. You can ask questions at any point. We have reviewed the questions that were submitted as part of your registration, and we are going to be covering a lot of those areas. So we have pre-planned our content. It's not scripted, don't worry, but we do have a 5-part kind of content agenda for you today. So I'm going to just quickly introduce our speakers. So we've got Kerrie Machin from Mitigo. So Kerrie, I don't know if you want to do just a quick intro to yourself.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm one of the directors here at Mitigo. We're a cyber risk management firm. We work with all manner of professional services firms and others to help them understand and manage and control their cyber risk. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah, great. And we're also joined by Simon Kershaw, who is our technology director at Wolters Kluwer, to give the perspective of what we're doing in our business to tackle cloud security, given that we are shifting into that realm. So Simon, I don't know if you want to just say a few words about your role.
Yeah, just good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Hopefully you'll find this informative. Obviously my role here is to try and give, as Steph says, the Wolters Kluwer position on how we deal with cybersecurity in our organisation.
Yeah, great, lovely. Thank you very much. So just to kind of kick us off, there's a lot of chatter in the media about cybersecurity at the moment, which I'm sure everybody has seen to a certain extent. So from our own cloud report that we've done recently, 81% of UK accountants are now using cloud software in some form, but 52% are saying that cyber attacks are still their biggest concern. So obviously you're here with us today to hopefully learn a little bit more. And Kerrie shared a few stats with us as well ahead of this webinar, that 7.78 million cybercrimes in 2024 were reported. 50% of UK businesses experienced a breach, which is quite scary. £1.5 million is the average ransomware payment that's demanded. And 83% of businesses haven't yet done a cyber vulnerability audit. So kicking us off from there, I mean, that's quite a lot of stats there. So I'm going to ask Kerrie the first question. So Kerrie, what types of attacks are you seeing most commonly in the accountancy sector?
Sure. I suppose if we just take a step and look at the media at the moment, because obviously there's a lot going on with regards to ransomware attacks, and so that is something that businesses need to be concerned about. Certainly in the accountancy sector, ransomware attacks tend to come in two guises. The first is going to be an encryption of the system. So if we look at something like Marks and Spencer's at the moment, appreciate they're not accountants, but this can happen to pretty much any firm. A full encryption of your system so that you can't access them is going to be pretty terrifying. But then the second part of ransomware attacks, and actually probably becoming more prevalent, is the stealing of data, and then the threat to expose that out onto the dark web. And obviously when you consider accountants are dealing with confidential information that they certainly don't want leaking out onto the web, then ransom attacks are something they need to be concerned about. But actually, ransomware is I suppose it's the high profile stuff we see in the news as we are at the moment. But actually by volume, it's more business email compromise that we see in the accountancy sector. What is that? It's exactly what it sounds like. It's threat actors getting into email accounts of accountants and then being able to weave their way through the systems. And as we go through, I'll talk a bit more about the purpose of the email compromise and what they can do from it. So email compromise, ransomware, that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, and who have you seen carrying out these attacks and how are they operating?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that people need to understand is that these are really sophisticated operators. It's no longer the teenager with a hoodie in the bedroom carrying out these attacks. You might get the odd one doing it, but sometimes it's state sponsored. Not normally at accountancy firms. That's more if it's going to go at Ministry of Defence or the NHS that we have seen in the last year or two. But what you'll see is it's organised criminal gangs coming out of China, Russia, Nigeria, North Korea, and effectively you've got different layers of criminals that do different jobs. A bit like in any business, you'll have someone that, someone might be in admin, someone will be in sales, somebody will be in technical, and what you see with cyber gangs is that you'll see people that are responsible for stealing credentials. So the usernames and passwords that we all use in our day-to-day lives and at work, there are criminals that are trying to steal those, and then what they'll do is they'll try to sell those onto what we call access brokers, and what the access brokers will use those to get into systems and understand what a business might look like. For example, how much they're worth. If they were to encrypt them, maybe they've got insurance. And certainly with North Face, some people might be aware North Face was attacked last week, and they were the victims of what's called credential stuffing, where a big list of usernames and passwords became available, and the criminals then used it against the North Face website. And because people have poor password hygiene, we saw the access brokers getting into North Face. But then you've got the big boys, which are the ransomware gangs, the people that develop the malware. And what we're seeing with that malicious software is what you see happening to people like Marks and Spencer's and the Co-op. But interestingly, they develop this software that can encrypt the systems and take the data out, but they don't often use it themselves. What they do is they operate, if you like, a bit of a licensing franchise kind of affair with what are called affiliates. And certainly that's what we've seen recently with the M&S one, is its affiliates using Dragon Force ransomware software to get into them. So I'm afraid that's what we're seeing, and it seems to be increasing, not decreasing at the moment.
Yeah. Simon, coming to you. So from a Wolters Kluwer point of view, what are the top security concerns that you're hearing from our customers, and what are you kind of
So I do hear a lot of what Kerrie's been talking about there, a lot of stuff, particularly around phishing and ransomware, that type of thing. Increasingly more sophisticated social engineering type attacks where people are really trying to kind of gather information from you to elicit things. But the other bit that we see as well, to kind of step away a little bit from the more organized side of cyber attacks, it's also the kind of prevalent concern is around misconfiguration of cloud services. So, particularly access controls and data residency, where's the data being stored? I think from an accountant's perspective, particularly those who are more used to more on-prem services, they know where the data is. It's on their own server, in their own building. They're aware of all that kind of stuff. And as we move to more cloud services, clearly, the data can be stored anywhere. So understanding where that data is and how people get access to it, I think is something that people are more increasingly worried about, concerned about, and how they can protect those access levels and those access layers, I think is something we're seeing more of as we go forwards.
Yeah, Simon, you did a recent talk at the Digital Accountancy Show, and you spoke about the shared responsibility model. So I don't know if you could just give us a little bit of insight.
Yeah, so I think security is a shared responsibility. So there's a lot of potential there for you to think, I'm with a cloud provider, they will secure my systems and my data that are hosted within that thing. And to a degree, that's true. The provider is responsible for the security of the infrastructure. I would say the firm, though, is very much responsible for, like I said, the user access, the configuration, the data governance. And I think that's where we can actually help. Obviously, with our systems, we obviously deal with some of those things, but also helping to advise and to kind of give best practice to firms about how you make sure. I talked a lot at the DAS conference about sort of limiting access to those who need it, making sure that you're not giving out admin access to all and sundry. Making sure you're very cognizant with the way that your systems are configured from a user access and a data access perspective.
Yeah, and with some of the stats that we started off with, do you think the fears around cloud security are justified?
To some extent, yeah. But what I would say is that the cloud platforms can actually be more secure than on-premise if configured properly. Clearly, when we start thinking about some of these cloud systems and the providers of those things, we're talking about large multinational, multi-billion-pound businesses who invest hundreds of thousands, millions of pounds in security. So, you know, clearly the levels of security that are placed around some of these cloud systems are incredibly high, and therefore incredibly good. Again, the real risk lies in how that's managed on a day-to-day basis. You know, so if I look again at our systems, you know, we have a whole organisation within Wolters Kluwer who are responsible for cybersecurity. We adhere to various different standards in the UK. We've got ISO 27001. We also have the National Institute of Science and Technology, their cybersecurity framework we use, which is assessed, you know, every 6 months or so. We have to fill in rigorous documentation about our processes and how we do things. You know, and that level of certification and attestation on our platforms is where we kind of can provide a bit more kind of reassurance in terms of the security around our systems.
Yeah, I've been part of those process documents, and they are tedious, but I know that they are for a very good reason.
Tedious but required.
Very much required. So moving on to maybe some more kind of case study examples. So coming back to you, Kerrie, can you share an example of a firm that was compromised through email spoofing or phishing?
Yes, lots of examples of that, I'm afraid. So let's just understand you know, what they are. So phishing, we all understand. That's you get an email that comes in, it's malicious, it's probably got some link to something that's going to try and get into your systems. And then spoofing is effectively threat actors setting up another email domain that looks like yours, but it's not yours. And the big difference between these is if a phishing email comes into your everyday domain, into your email account, and the criminals are operating within your email account, the chances are, if you've configured it properly, you can see what's going on, because you might have some alerts in place, or you know, they may even make some mistakes which will trigger the fact that they're in there. The problem is if they used what we call a spoofed account. And just to give an example, let's say I work for abcaccounting.co.uk. Yeah, they might set up abc-accounting.co.uk. And so because they've been in the main account, they copy everything across to the spoof domain, and then they carry it on from that hyphen account, as it were. The problem is if people aren't looking at the email name as it comes in, and most people aren't, because it will be on a chain of emails that they're expecting, then they'll just carry on. But unfortunately, you're going to be in dialogue with the cyber criminals, and they're going to do what you want. And an example of that is we worked with a firm where the criminals had got into their systems, into their 365 account. They'd been in there for about a year. When we did the forensics at the end, they'd been hanging out in there for about a year when they came. And so they'd been looking at all of the different invoices that were due to be paid, all of the different sort of information that was flying around. And then what they did is gradually, it was only a small firm, there was only 12 people that worked in the firm, but what they did is they made 8 of them administrators, because the 365 account wasn't configured correctly. It goes to what Simon was saying a moment ago. 365's got loads of security configuration in it. It's a brilliant piece of kit. If you don't know what you're doing with it, then you know, the criminals can have at it, which they did here. So they were operating within it. They were looking at everybody's emails, but what they started to do was forward all of the emails that were coming in from that account across to themselves into a spoof domain over the course of that year. And using those admin functions, they were able to hide, they were able to liaise with clients as the operator or the employee, and get extra information. The interesting thing on this is that the criminals were logging in from Nigeria, the United States, from Germany. They were operating via VPNs. Anyway, what's the punchline to the story? Having been in there for a year and watched what was going on, they dropped out of the main account. They carried on the attack with lots of different clients, and tried to hijack some invoices, i.e. they took genuine invoices, changed the bank details, and sent them onto the clients of the firm. There were 5 on one day. 4 clients recognized that they were incorrect, and the 5th client paid the fake invoice to the cyber criminals. That was £500,000 for that particular invoice. And and the numbers are scary and big. You know, we see often hundreds and hundreds of thousands. It's, you know, they're not really looking for £50 or a couple of grand. That's not what they're after. And that was all from starting in a main account, moving it to a spoofed account, and then carrying on the attack thereafter. So, and this is stuff we see daily. It's pretty normal stuff.
So what do you think were the specific technical failings that contributed to that breach? What should people be thinking of?
Yeah, so their MFA was misconfigured, which is interesting. Everybody, I think, thinks that MFA is a silver bullet. It's really important to have, but you can't rely solely on it because criminals have worked out how to get around MFA, by the way, unfortunately. But I mentioned they were logging in from USA, Nigeria, and Germany. None of the people in the firm worked there, so why they were allowing that geographical access, they shouldn't have done. There was no recognition of the devices that were accessing the system, which you can do. You can have trusted devices. There were no alerts in place for when they were forwarding emails and changing the rules within the system. None of the staff had been trained. And unfortunately, if I'm being honest with you, they'd relied on an IT firm to do it, and IT and cyber risk management are completely different disciplines. You know, we do different things. IT make things work. Security looks at risk and understands how criminals operate. And so really, they just had no understanding of their overall risk. And, you know, that's an organisational failing, unfortunately.
Yeah. And Simon, just thinking, have there been any examples from our own customer base that you've seen have been caught out by, you know, not configuring their systems properly or just poor governance?
Yeah, a couple. Thankfully, not too many. I'm sure. But I think to Kerrie's point a minute ago, actually, one of the things I have seen a couple of times is kind of disabled MFA. Now, as Kerrie just said, MFA is not a catch-all. It doesn't flip everything, but disabling it is possibly a slightly cardinal sin for the sake of it feels to users that it's an extra step they don't need to do before they log in. It's a pain, you know. We all feel it a little bit when we have to log onto our systems and get our phones out. But it is really important to leave that configured on. As Kerrie says, it won't catch everything these days. There are ways past it, but you are far better off having it enabled than nothing at all. So I think that's one thing I've seen quite a few times. Our recommendation is always to have that enabled. And then again, back to the overly permissive user roles. So, you know, it's granting admin level access to everyone is just an open goal. You know, if somebody does manage to maliciously get in, to then find that they've got access to everything is really the biggest error we see across the board. So it's really back to that making sure your permissions are set in the right way for the right level of access for the right user. I can't really stress that enough. So those are a couple of examples of what we've seen and experienced fairly recently, in fact.
Yeah, and I know you shared quite a few detailed slides at DAS, so maybe we can share that with our audience afterwards. So I think that could be really helpful. Is there anything you can add just about how we're supporting customers in those moments?
So yeah, if something does happen, the main thing for us is acting fast. You know, the quicker you get in there and sort out the issue, the far less damage can be done. I mean, to Kerrie's example of somebody having access in there for a year, that's crazy. You know, we want to get in there, work fast, and our support teams and incident response teams can collaborate very quickly to identify the root cause of things and get it fixed. But what I would also say is that it isn't just about fixing the issue there and then. It's then the education piece is critical, right? So we've come in, we've managed to work fast, we've managed to limit the damage done, but that education of how do we make sure there's no reoccurrence of this issue, and making sure we leave that kind of issue, not just with, we fixed it, goodbye, but we fixed it, goodbye, and here's the knowledge and the skills that you need to make sure it doesn't happen again. I think that's a really important part. The education piece is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially now we're kind of moving more into cloud accounting. Another stat from a recent report from Wolters Kluwer, I'll share it with you all after the webinar. 97% of accountants in this survey said that they mostly or totally trusted the cloud, yet 52% still worry about cyber attacks. So trust has got to be earned through action. So when we're talking about cloud adoption, so Simon, I'm going to stick with you just for the moment. So we talk about a secure by design approach. Can you explain a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, so this is kind of, so there's a couple of tracks. There's one which is more around how we develop software, and there's another about how we deploy our software into environments. So if I stick with the deployment exercise first of all, so we have a very layered way of deploying our software. So there's We start with an edge zone where literally all you can do is get into the edge zone, and your traffic will then be load balanced into where it needs to go. You then have a DMZ, you then have a back end and a core layer. So all these layers are separated. We limit traffic between these areas. So your business logic isn't totally accessible from the internet. You have to go through a couple of layers first before you can get to the business logic. The business logic is separated from the data layer, so that and we probably limit the traffic from there. It kind of, again, limits the penetration of what somebody can get to as they come through that thing. So I think layered security is really key there. Again, the designs are all aligned to that NIST CSF I spoke about, and ISO 27001. So it's an accredited, and there's, we've got to make sure all our policies are kept up to date and approved through those organizations. And then we look at, on the code layer of things, even when we're developing the applications in our pipelines, when we do the builds, etc., we've got third-party products along the lines of Checkmarks and Black Duck and SonarQube, which analyze all the code and highlight any issues and any areas of risks that are there. And I think back to Kerrie's point about, what we're trying to do is mitigate and identify and mitigate risk. And we can do that all the way through the process, right from the start, in terms of when we first start writing code, all the way through to when we deploy our applications. And I just think that's the kind of overall umbrella that we can provide in terms of how we go about things.
Yeah, great. And Kerrie, just so Simon's kind of explained it from a Wolters Kluwer standpoint. So what are you kind of seeing in terms of, challenges when people are configuring cloud systems from your side of things?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things here. First of all, it's great to hear what WK are doing on this. You working to NIST frameworks, ISO 27001. It's really important for people to understand that not all cloud services are equal, and they're not designed equally. So really, you've got to do your due diligence on your provider to understand what they are doing in the background, but then understand what the cloud service is providing to you and how critical it is to your operation, i.e., if it went down, what would that mean to you? But if we go back to something that Simon said earlier, and it's about the shared responsibility. So yes, do your due diligence on your cloud provision, but you've got to understand that you are the route in the front door into any of the providers that you are using. So you've got to understand the behavior of the user themselves. You've got to train them. You've got to understand whether they will fall for something. You've then got to look at the connection across to that system as well, how you get into it, what the device security looks like. Because cyber criminals use different attack surfaces to get in. There's different ways that they can go across. I think one of the problems that we see, there are a couple of misconceptions. The first is some firms think that this will never happen to them. It only happens to big firms. That's not how it is. We deal predominantly with SMEs. And the second thing is, it was interesting, your stat where I think you just said in the 90s, people saying that the cloud it made them feel safer. No, the cloud is no safer than having on-premise. It's a different risk assessment. You've got to consider it separately. If you think about it, most of the cyber attacks that we see nowadays, are on companies that are solely working in the cloud, and it's just that they've not really understood their risk profile. And so, just to sort of bring that, I guess, to a bit of a conclusion is, right, what type of cloud service have you got? Because you might have some data storage. Well, where is that data storage? Who's hosting that for you? What does their security look like? What are their processes? It could be a platform that you're using. Let's use 365 as an example. Again, I gave you an example where someone's just fallen for a fake invoice. That's a cloud platform. It just wasn't configured properly. The security was all over the place. Understand how that gets set up. And then the next one is whether you're using hosted providers, which is a different type of cloud service where they effectively, is you not having it on premise, they hold it on their premise. And we've seen in the last couple of years some absolutely horrific stories where the hosted provider haven't got their ducks in a line when it comes to security, and it's blocked lots of businesses out of their systems. So what you really need to be doing is doing your due diligence on your supply chain. Again, and it should be answers like Simon's giving, that we're working to this framework, we do these tests. When we're doing coding, we've got these checks and balances in place. so that you can turn around and you know that they're providing the back end, which is safe and secure, but always have in the front of your mind that it's your risk also, and you've got to understand, you know, how your vulnerabilities could impact those services as well.
Yeah. Are there some basic steps that firms can think about to help protect themselves better than maybe they are at the moment?
Yeah, the first thing is I'd say get a risk assessment carried out. Understand what your vulnerabilities are. Understand what your risks are. You know, that stat you gave out at the beginning came from the government's National Cyber Survey, which is you know, 80% of businesses haven't conducted a risk assessment. Why? Well, generally it's because they think IT is taking care of these things, and they're not. But basic things apart from doing a risk assessment, Simon alluded to it: zero trust security models assume no one and nothing is trustworthy, and that you have some form of verification for it to access into your systems, multi-factor authentication, trusted devices, that sort of thing. MFA, basic stuff, make sure it's switched on, make sure everybody's got it. Because I can promise you, we go in to see firms where they might have 50 to 100 staff, MFA switched on for 98 of them, and you can guarantee it will be one of the two that's not switched on that will have the access that gets them into the systems. Encrypting data at rest and in transit. We've seen some really bad examples where people are emailing across spreadsheets with lots and lots of personal information on there. Criminals jump into the email accounts and they've got the data, and that leads on to huge problems, because it's probably going to be reportable to the ICO, and you're going to be investigated and possibly fined for that, and the fact that you're going to have to tell all of your clients that their data's been compromised. So yeah, audit, risk assessments, understand your legal and regulatory responsibilities. There's one, which I think also helps people to recognise it's not an IT issue. You know, you've got GDPR from a legal perspective, because that's how you're going to get fined if you have a data compromise from a cyber breach. And the second is obviously if you're ICAW or whatever your regulator says, but they will have rules in place and obligations that you need to follow when it comes to this. And I think just finally is, if you haven't got an incident response plan, I would recommend that you develop one in advance of any cyber attack, just in case it happens. You do not want to make up your incident response plan in the middle of an attack. And that same survey that you were alluding to there, Steph, said that 78% of businesses haven't got a cyber incident response plan, which is also a scary number.
That is a scary number. We have had a question come in. So this is from Alexandros. Most small accountants, especially sole practitioners, his included, have benefited from following the stuff that we do at Wolters Kluwer, thank you very much, and through research papers. What he's saying here is, with cybersecurity being such an important and growing risk to businesses, would companies like Wolters Kluwer, for example, consider setting up a cybersecurity partner collaboration to help with the small practices? And he says for a fee. He's not, you know, he's not expecting it to be done for free. Where potentially smaller firms can't necessarily afford, you know, the additional advice there. So I don't know if that's a question we can answer now, but any thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, I would say it's a really good point. Let's capture it. Let me take it away. Let me have some conversations, and when we can see what we do. I won't commit, but absolutely, it's something we should be looking at. I think it's something we can help support you guys with. So yes, but let's take that away and come back to the question.
I think there's some resources that we can provide as well. Like Simon, I know you put a checklist, and we've got a few done from recent events, so we're more than happy to share that after this. But I think we do appreciate that there are challenges for a smaller practice in terms of cost, resource, and time.
And look, I mean, like I mentioned at the very beginning, you know, Wolters Kluwer, we have a whole business unit that's aligned to governing security across all our business units across the globe, right? So it's a large organisation, and there will be a lot of information that can come out of that organisation in terms of how to do things, and white papers and other bits and pieces, as you mentioned, checklists, etc. But even over and above that, we can look at other options as well. So let's take that one away and see what we can do with it, because it's a really good point.
Yeah, I mean, Kerrie, have you seen any other kind of help that people can seek if they are a smaller practice and they can't afford some of the stuff that we've talked about?
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously we have a service. We do work with individual sole traders and small firms as well. Comes at a cost, you know. I think the person that asked the question recognises that it always does. But if you are looking to do it yourself, then I would point you in the direction of the National Cyber Security Centre, the NCSC. They've got lots of good guidance and advice on their website, and that they will help you to do things as well. But, you know, just get some basic things. Make sure your MFA switched on. Make sure you've got antivirus. Make sure you're patching and updating your laptop or any software when it's asking you and prompting you to do that. But so yeah, but it's not easy. And the problem is, of course, is the bigger you get, the more money you can throw at it. Although not all firms are, just to be clear. But, you know, you're just as likely to be hit at the smaller scale as you are to the bigger scale, unfortunately. So you've both got the same sort of responsibilities that you need to conduct on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, guys. So the next area that we plan to look at is talking around governance, responsibility and risk, which I know we've touched on a couple of times, even you know, up until now in this session. I think one of the things that has come out from the research that we did ahead of the session is security isn't just technical, it's strategic. And another juicy stat, because I love a stat, 78% of firms have no incident response plan, which I think you've both alluded to actually. And so about who owns the risk, I mean, Kerrie, maybe if I come to you first. So why is it that cybersecurity needs to belong in the boardroom?
Who's going to pay the bill and who's this going to impact the most when this goes wrong? Generally, it's going to be the board. It's going to be the people that run the business and the employees and the clients. But you know, the buck stops with the people that run the business. And actually, let's go back to the legal and regulatory obligations. But now let's also look at something that was introduced in April, which was the Cyber Governance Code of Practice. This has been brought out by the UK government, and it is placed squarely on the shoulders of senior leaders, board members, directors, the requirement for governance on cybersecurity and their expectations. So it's a voluntary code at the moment, although the government have said if there's not a big take up from business, then they will look to put legislation in around it. So, you know, they're recognising, if you go back to all of those stats that you've said, the government have looked at it from their own surveys and said 80% of businesses aren't doing this right. And cyber risk is up there now with financial and legal risk. Therefore, come on, board members, you've got to get to grips with this. You've got to own it. Don't be palming this off to your IT firm because they don't know. You know, there's no disrespect to IT firms. They do a great job, but they're no cyber risk managers. That's the problem. And the code of practice has 5 themes. We won't have time to go into all of it, but those 5 themes are risk management. So someone has to own it. Someone has to make sure risk assessments are done. The second, as you just said there, Steph, cyber strategy. What is your strategy? How are you going to implement it? How does that fit within any other frameworks that you've got within the organization? The third theme is people. Training people, having policy, understanding bad behavior and bad business processes that can lead to cyber risk. The fourth is incident planning, which we've talked about a little bit already. That you know, and they're saying that you need to test this annually as well, which we totally agree with. But the fifth one, and I think the most important theme here, apart from risk assessment, is assurance and oversight. The government are saying that you must, as a board of directors, have oversight of your cyber risk and how the controls are being implemented, and that they are indeed implemented, and you must gain assurance of that. And we're seeing more and more now that, you know, the government and the National Cyber Security Centre and businesses are recognising that actually that assurance should come from a third party independent of someone that's qualified to do it, a specialist in it. Someone like us, yes, for sure. But why? If your IT are doing it, they might not be specialists, and they're certainly going to be marking their own homework. I think from a compliance perspective, if anybody's in audit here, you know that it should be a third party that should be looking at it and signing tick box to say, yep, you've got this, you're doing a good job here. So why does it belong in the boardroom? Well, for all of those reasons.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, you've answered very nicely Alessandro's next question. So hopefully that's helped you there. Simon, we've talked about education. Obviously, we do our bit with our customers. So can you speak a little bit more about what we're doing with our customer base to just communicate that this is a shared responsibility. We've got all of the stuff that we're working on as a vendor, but how are we working with customers to
Sure. I will actually just pop back to your question to Kerrie about why does cybersecurity belong in the boardroom, and actually just to share that actually, obviously I've spoken about NIST a lot, but there's a maturity score for our cybersecurity that comes with that. Our executive board and senior management are all actually part of the remuneration for the past 4 years has been linked to our security maturity score. So that brings it actually to the forefront for those executive members to make sure that we are doing the right things by our customers in terms of security. It is really thought of at the top echelons of the business. So I just wanted to add that to kind of reiterate what Kerrie was saying in terms of where it belongs, where the responsibility and ownership should land as well. To bring it back down to the question you asked in terms of how do we educate customers on shared responsibility, I think when we onboard customers, we will go through various different guidance checklists, configuration audits, that kind of thing. We can obviously continue to do that. We can run that ad hocly. If a customer comes along and says, not sure we've got things quite right, we can obviously then provide some professional services to do that kind of configuration audit to make sure things are working in the right way. And obviously we can clarify exactly where the responsibilities lie with them, with us, across that kind of landscape. What I would say is that governance isn't optional. It's foundational. It kind of, you have to make sure that you've got the right things in place. I'm always a big fan of a checklist. If you've gone through the guidance, if you've gone through the things you need to do, ticked off the things you need to do, which continually evolve, right? You don't write your checklist and then 3 years later you're still using the same checklist because the landscape changes. But I think that's the main things that we do. I think to the person who asked the question earlier, I think we can probably do some more things which could be interesting to explore. But at the moment, it is really about the onboarding workshops, how we can kind of manage the configurations, etc. And that's the kind of things we do engage with our customers with actively and quite often. Yeah,
absolutely. And we do have a few events coming up, so watch this space. We've got
that's the other thing, right? Things like
about this
webinar, other such events such as this, we do engage quite regularly with our customers on.
Absolutely. So, I mean, coming at it from our customers, how can they help to build transparency and confidence with their clients around this topic? So,
sure.
Whoever wants.
I can take a little bit of that, so then maybe Kerrie can build. So I think, not to blow our trumpets, but a lot of what we do actually can be repeated down the line. So I think we transparency is earned, right? It's being open and sharing the stuff. So obviously we publish our security certifications. We provided histories on incidents that have occurred and what the root cause analysis of those things were. We do engage in regular security reviews. And obviously we publish and assess annually externally what our cybersecurity maturity score is. So things like that can obviously be brought down the line. If a customer is using our software, they can ask us for the information and they can share it in turn with their clients. And if there's anything then outside of the scope of what we provide, they can do similar. Yeah. So I think sharing the information is probably the key most important thing. Tell people we've got this accreditation, we've got this maturity score, we work with these providers who assure us, and so I think it kind of trickles down. It would be my take.
Yeah, Kerrie, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on who the client is, and it depends where you are in the supply chain, and being able, and some people are. What we're seeing is in supply chains, we see a lot more questionnaires coming about where, be it the client or the provider, where either one of them will be sending questionnaires around cybersecurity and posture. But I think I'm going to go with what Simon said is, show people, be proactive in managing it, and then be proactive in demonstrating that you're doing it. So for example, what could you do? Well, you do ISO, you're ISO accredited, Simon, so I imagine that's on your website somewhere, and you're shouting about it. There's Cyber Essentials Plus, there's IASME governance, which are government schemes that you can do. It helps you to become cyber secure. You need to understand any of the shortcomings in those certifications, but they're a really good start. And if you've got the badge and you've gone through that certification process, get it on your website, get it on your emails, show people that you're security conscious. You know, because I think the thing is more and more people now, and I mentioned it earlier, more and more people get that this is a big risk. And I think, you know, people want to do business with businesses that have got a good reputation, and not just because, you know, not just because they can help them make money or they're good at their job, but because they know that they're safe and secure, and that's becoming more and more important. You know, as I say, you look at the reputations of some of those firms out in the news, and look at the profit hit that they're going to take. You know, and smaller firms will suffer far more quickly from not doing this or promoting it. That's for sure, because they don't have as deep a pockets as some of those bigger firms.
And it's something you've got to continually assess, and you can't just tick a box and it's done. You need to keep coming back to it and keep reviewing it.
Think about this, right? What's changed in the last year around cyber security or cyber threat is the barrier to entry is much lower. I was mentioning earlier, you know, this ransomware as a service, you know, where the cyber gangs create the malware and then license it off to other people. So in effect, I could go and license that malware. Yeah, I have no skills at all when it comes to being able to deploy, you know, or write malware at all. But now I could license it and then use that against businesses. So the barrier to entry into cybercrime has become much, much lower. And also AI has improved significantly over the last couple of years, and that's helping criminals to carry out those attacks as well. So whatever you look like right now, yeah, you're going to look different anyway, because you'll employ some new form of technology or change the way you operate over time, because all businesses do. But the threat actors are definitely changing the way they operate. So it has to be an ongoing process, which is why the government have put in this governance code of practice, because it's that tick list, Simon. You like it. Let me check that. Let me see what boxes I need to check. Let's make sure they're checked. Now let's do it again. Now let's check what the new threats look like. Now let's see whether we're being able to defend ourselves against them. And you mentioned something earlier as well, Simon, around social engineering. You know, we all put far too much information about ourselves out onto the internet, and criminals can get hold of that really easily, and then they use that in order to dupe us into, you know, to allow them into systems. My understanding is the M&S ransomware attack was a third-party supplier where social engineering was used on that person. So it was, I think they received an email or something like that. It sounded like they knew all about them and it was a genuine one, but it was from information that would have been taken from the internet and then used to just infiltrate into the system. So as I say, it sounds scary because it is, but it doesn't mean that we can't go and do things and we can't operate. We just need to understand what that risk looks like and then put the right procedures and processes in place. And it doesn't need to be, you mentioned earlier, Simon, you know, around, I've got to get my phone out and I've got to put my code in and I've got to do this and do that. It doesn't have to be too complex and it doesn't need to be too, you know, too bothersome, but it's worth it just to make sure that you're safe and secure, that you do go through a few extra hoops every now and then. But a lot of it can be done in the background and a lot of it can be controlled just through good business practice by understanding what good looks like, what good behavior looks like.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, with all of these excellent plans that everybody's going to take away from this session and put into place, if an incident does happen, you know, it's just one of those realities, like you say, the barrier is coming down, you know, there's more threats coming our way. So what should a basic incident response plan include? So I'll keep it to Kerrie and then Simon.
Yeah. No, I'll pick it up to start with, if that's all right, Simon. Basic incident response plan is, right, who are you going to contact? What are the roles of the people within the incident response plan? Okay, so recognizing that something has gone wrong, you need to know who you're going to pick the phone up to. Is that an internal IT person? Is it a cyber person? Is it a cloud provider? What's your communication going to be? Because let's say you're in the midst of a ransomware attack and client data has been stolen and your systems have been encrypted. The criminals are going to put that information out onto the dark web, some of it very quickly, and the press are going to pick up on that as well. So you've got to work out what you're going to say to your clients, what you're going to say to your staff, what you're going to say to your shareholders, what you're going to say to the press. Incident response has to have all of those things built within it, because it will all happen very, very quickly. And then you've got to work out, what's your plan B? Incident response plan, business continuity has to have a plan B. What are you going to do here? How operationally resilient are you? What can you do? What can't you do? If you think about the co-op, it was interesting that they switched off their systems apparently quite quickly, and so their outcome wasn't quite as bad as necessarily as Marks and Spencer's have been. Don't get me wrong, the shelves were still empty, but they're almost at full recovery now, as I understand it. But you've got to have that plan B, and you've got to test it. And I would say, do test it. Do a tabletop exercise, which is difficult, I appreciate, for small businesses here. But I say small business if you're a sole trader, but I don't know the size of the organisations on this call, but if you've got 20, 30 staff, then do a tabletop each year just to test it, and have someone, invest a little bit of money to make sure it will work.
Yeah, and Simon, how can we help our customers with that?
So obviously, as I mentioned, we do have a global security incident response team. So if something's happened, get in touch. What they'll do is come straight and engage immediately. Their track is always, we'll isolate the issue, contain the issue, really, really important. Initiate audits, so they make sure that anywhere else where the system may have been compromised. And then it's back to, once we've got in there, found the problem, contained the problem, then it's about making sure that the gaps are closed going forward. So that's really where we can come to the table. We have those experts, those personnel who can come in and make sure they're doing that straight away. And as I mentioned earlier on, speed is always of the essence. The minute you detect anything, do reach out, have that incident plan, who you're going to contact. That might include us, particularly if you're using our systems. And yeah, we can contain things really, really quite quickly. I've had a couple of examples, not this year, funny enough, but in recent memory, where we've had to go in and do something very quickly. And as I say, speed is essential.
It is, and I don't think there's no such thing as a silly question on this,
No.
Simon. Yeah, we have people that phone us up and just like, I think, and you got to know. You've got to know. And if they're not there, that's fine. If there's nothing going wrong.
Yeah, at worst, you identify something that isn't actually a risk, but it helps you identify something that could be a risk, because we've come in and had a look. Yeah. It's going to improve your security posture, which is going to be good.
I've definitely had a few phishing, well, what I suspected were phishing emails, and they turned out to be absolutely fine, but I'm so paranoid about anything that looks a little bit out of place. So it's good to know that me reporting that kind of thing isn't too much of an irritation to our team.
I don't think you can be too careful.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, we've kind of come to the end of our pre-planned content. So if there are any other questions in the room, please do submit them. So maybe I can come to both of you with just maybe some kind of top tips that you want people to take away from this session. So Kerrie, I don't know if I can just start with you, just anything that, the key things that people need to take away and think about.
Sure. I'm going to be a bit repetitive, but you know what? There's nothing wrong with a repetition when it comes to this, right? Get MFA, get it switched on anything that you can. Use different passwords for different platforms, okay? Don't use the same password. If you're doing that, you're going to get in trouble at some point. That's what's happened at North Face there. And you might say, how do I remember 10 different passwords? Use a password manager. Don't go and invest in something like LastPass. If you use Apple products, then it's inherently built into it. In fact, you're seeing more and more things on Google and Microsoft and things like that as well. So those are basic things, but do them. The next thing is, if you're running a business, get a risk assessment carried out. Understand what and here's the thing, it might cost you money to do a risk assessment, but what it will do is it will give you the answers to what you need to do to control the risk that you've got. We actually see businesses spend a lot of money on security technology that they don't need, because what happened is someone said, this is a great idea, but they don't understand the problem they were trying to solve. What a risk assessment will do is tell you what your problem is and go, invest your money here and that will solve the problem. Yeah. And so that's why I will always say everything should start with a risk assessment, and then it should end with an assurance check to make sure you've got the controls in place to manage the risks that you picked up. So those would be my bits of wisdom.
Okay, Simon, batting it over to you now.
Yeah, so something similar. I think first point: review your firm's cloud security policies. Make sure you know where they are, that they're up to date. Is there even one? Because if there isn't, guess what? There's something missing, right? So do that first and foremost. Then conduct an internal security assessment. So are you actually executing that security policy that you have? Or is it, it was written 5 years ago and somebody put it on a dusty shelf somewhere and that's it. So do a security assessment. I think stay informed actually about emerging cloud security threats, right, and best practices. So there's lots of ways you can do that. There's industry security newsletters you can sign up to. Cloud providers generally provide updates fairly regularly, so get yourself subscribed to those kind of things. Participate in sessions like this, webinars, workshops, conferences. There are plenty out there. Get involved. This stuff is constantly being updated and constantly being refreshed. So this is a great place to come and learn things. Engage with your professional networks, forums. Talk to people. Communication is really important around this. And I would say try and implement some form of continuous security training. To bring it back to us again, all the people in my organization from a delivery point of view have to do security training and a certain allotted time of security training every year based on their role. So developers, for example, will have to do 16 hours of security training, and that has to be completed every year and is refreshed every year. So I think having that kind of thing in there as well is really important. And then engage with us. If there's stuff you want to know, there's questions you want to ask, then engage with Wolters Kluwer for further advice. We will certainly more than happy to provide it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there haven't been any more questions come through, but if any occur to you, then please just reach out to us and we'll do our best to come back to you with some advice. I mentioned earlier that there's a few different resources that between Kerrie and Simon have provided. So I'll share those as part of our follow-up so you can take a look at those. We are running our conference in October, so if you're interested, there will be some sessions around cloud security, because you will very much, hopefully you will know that we are shifting our focus into the cloud. So obviously this topic is super important to us and we want to bring you along on that journey with us. So if there's any other sessions that we do, we will keep you in touch with that. And I think all that's left then, if there's no other questions from our audience, is to thank Kerrie and Simon very much for their time. It's been a great session, a great chat. So thank you both so much. And you'll catch these guys at another event, I'm sure, because I'll rope them in. But I'm good at roping people in to do more sessions. So thank you very much. We can leave it there so you get a little bit of time back. But thank you ever so much for joining us this morning, and we hope to see you on another session very soon. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thanks very much. Take care. Bye-bye.